So, you want to know what life was like after the flood? Well, can you imagine giant dragonflies? They were huge. Everything was huge back then. And you know dinosaurs are really just dragons, right? Unicorns were around back then too. Although, to be fair, they didn't really look like the storybooks. The problem with unicorns was their hearing was just too good. I was never a fan of unicorns. I do miss the giant food, though. I just wish we would have had actual toilet paper back then.
You see what we do for you, Michael.
Oh my gosh. The seashell.
You tell all your friends, I'm going to be on Avoiding Babylon tonight. Oh, maybe you shouldn't have told them. We had hold on, I'm trying, like, everything's new in this stupid studio, and I'm trying to like figure the lighting out, and I don't know what I'm doing here. All right, yeah, it's a little dark in my studio. I'm gonna have Rob help me with the lighting. Also, the locals seems to have not, I don't know what's going on with locals. Yeah, I don't know, locals, something's happening, but we hit 100,000 subscribers last night.
That's fantastic. That's awesome.
It's like, it kind of feels weird doing the show without Rob, because it was something we were both, it's one of those things where like you want to hit the number, but nothing changes when you hit the number, first off, and like our views are the same, so I don't understand where all these subs are coming from. Like, we do have clips that took off that, you know, those will have 30,000 views, things like that, so I'm assuming that's where the subscribers are coming from, but they don't watch like the main stream. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And then
I'm a subscriber. I got the little half an hour alert on my phone, said, hey, you're on in 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's like, it'll feed it to your like 20% of your audience, and if people don't click on it, but like everything seems slow. Like even the chat seems low. I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But 100,000 subscribers, nothing's changed for us at all except for the number. And me and Rob are now going to fight over the play button.
Oh.
see who gets the play button.
Well, tell Rob he can have the first one. You get the second one.
Well, oh man, I think he said everything. No, I don't know. It's my channel, so I probably set it up. It might come to me first, and then I can hold it hostage against him.
There you go. Or you can have a fantasy football thing where the winner takes the button.
I think you could just pay extra for a second button. But we tonight's knickknack success story is me. I took knickknacks and transformed my studio space. So maybe maybe at another time I'll give you guys a little tour of the whole space. But my son had the idea to switch rooms. So my basement, when you come down the stairs, it's basically like a big den area where like we had like a family room, and then my son had his bedroom off to the right, and then my wife, you know, the laundry room's down there too. My son said, why don't you take my bedroom and I'll move into the main area. So he has a giant bedroom now with a den area. I mean, it was good for him, but it made sense for me also because the kids kept touching my things and I would lose my mind whenever they would touch my stuff. So tonight's knickknack success story is me. I took a few knickknacks and I ripped my basement apart. I built a wall and I built a new studio. Go to knickknack.com and use code AB25. Oh man, I'm gonna have to do this right. Hang on. Let's see. Okay, so wait. Here we go. Ready? Okay, so go to knickknack.com, use code AB25% off your first purchase for 25% off. And after that, use code AB10 for 10% off subsequent purchases. We love knickknacks. Every week we try to feature an amazing knickknack story. And also Black Monk Rosary featured right on my mantle over here. Oh, everything's opposite. My heavy duty Black Monk Rosary. They are awesome gifts for communion, confirmation, wedding gifts. And they work well as a self-defense tool because they weigh about 15 pounds each. So you can club somebody over the head. Go to Black Monk Rosary, use code Avoiding Babylon for 10% off. Michael, how have you been, man?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Just as you know, we've been busy plugging away with new reports, and this one is a doozy. We have a pretty horrific follow-up to it, which I can tell you about a little bit. The more we look at what's going on in the church, the worse things seem.
Man, you've been doing this for how long?
Oh, let's see. I think I started investigating CCHD in 2009. So what's that? Almost 20 years?
Oh my goodness. I don't know how you do it. I really don't. Cause I remember seeing like the first time I probably saw you, maybe the first time probably would have been on like Church Militant or something. Like you were making the rounds very early on. And it was you that got me to stop giving to that second collection that comes around, because that second collection is always for, you know, the health and human services stuff, or Catholic relief services, things like that. And the stuff you've uncovered with Catholic relief services is just horrendous. But we really haven't spoken much since all the commotion about Leo coming in, and we see how everybody's kind of like settling in on what they think Leo is. Everybody's it's hard to say what I think of him, but I think he's exactly what I expected. I expected him to just continue on with the Francis program with less fanfare, like less bold headlines coming out of the Vatican every day and things like that. How have you received the first year of Leo?
He's I keep hoping for the best and expecting the worst, and so far I haven't been disappointed.
It looks like Rocky at the end of a fight. I don't know what to tell you guys. I just got home from work. Here's what it is. Yeah, I'm gonna have to work. I hope Anna isn't reading the comments, and I am. I don't know what to tell you guys. Look, this is what you came for. Yeah, same here. Like, you hope for the best and you expect the worst. I saw your report on LifeSite the other day. You digging into all these different groups that are kind of playing footsie over at the Vatican and the things that seem to be. And you also, did you read the new document on AI?
I have been struggling my way through it. I consider myself at least a relatively intelligent man, and it's imminently frustrating for me to read a single sentence or two consecutive sentences or even three sentences in a row and not understanding a single lick of what was just said. Because the use of ambiguous, vague, and broad sweeping general words throughout this entire document is just, it's absolutely infuriating. And it reads like a bunch of word salad, trying to say something that maybe be profound, but it never quite lands. And it's, I think that some of the analysis of what's going on with AI is spot on. You know, I don't have any concern with that, but the proposed solutions to it are problematic at best.
Yeah, we've been going through old documents of papal encyclicals for the past couple of months, like for the past month or so, and to compare what popes said before to because people used to think John Paul II had,
a lot of his stuff was hard to understand.
People thought John Paul II had these great encyclicals, but even his stuff was kind of terrible.
Yep.
Compared to the preconciliar documents, like those preconciliar documents.
Wordy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like every single one. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just playing with the stupid. It's either blinding me or like,
that's the sacrifice of fandom.
Figuring things out while I'm on air.
The sacrifice of fame is learning how to live with blindness. I have 6 lights on me, and they're all at full capacity, which is why.
Yeah, but you have a face worth lighting up. I don't.
Oh, so. That's right. Cut me, Mick. Cut me, Mick.
the documents that came out that we've been going through, Rob and I can get through them in a 20-minute sitting. Like, you go through and they're a couple of pages long and you can get through them, and they have such depth to them, and they're warning us about this impending danger that's heading towards society and culture. And then every single thing that they warned us about before the council is the very thing that they're holding up as the good after the council. It's bizarre.
Yep. No, and that's really kind of the essence of the problem with this encyclical, is that it's 3 times longer than Rerum Novarum and about 10 times less intelligible.
Because I've been working on this studio all weekend, and I haven't had a chance to even look at it. So all I've seen is stuff that people are like quoting and putting quotes up, and it just seems like word salad. It seems, you know, the couple of things I saw had to do with the Catholic Church not having a monopoly on truth. Like, this is such an insane thing for the church. Like, the church is supposed to be the teacher of all humanity, and now the church is sitting here saying, hey, we don't have a monopoly on the truth. And it's just, it's as if the church has lost her identity and understanding of what her role is.
So here, I'll give you an example. This is a quote from the introduction of the encyclical. It says, "In the era of artificial intelligence, when human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human." Well, what does profoundly human mean?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to remain profoundly human, suggesting that we somehow lost our humanity? What does that mean? He goes on, he says, "We must lovingly safeguard the grandeur of humanity bestowed upon us and revealed in its fullness in Christ, the splendor of which no machine can ever replace." Well, what's the modifier here that we're talking about? He's talking about safeguarding the grandeur of humanity bestowed upon us and revealed in its fullness in Christ. So the fullness in Christ, the humanity in the fullness of Christ, is not entirely what we're supposed to be aspiring to. What we're supposed to be doing is uniting ourselves to Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. We're supposed to be in communion with him. And then through communion with him, we can then be in communion with others. That's the nature of the cross. Long bar in the middle, short bar at the cross part. So it's problematic there. Then he says, the splendor of which no machine can ever replace. The splendor of what? Is he talking about the splendor of the grandeur of humanity or the splendor of the grandeur of Christ? So the modifier there is misplaced. It's hard to understand what he's saying. Then he says, true progress always stems from a heart open to others, an intelligence willing to listen, and a will that seeks what unites rather than what separates. Well, okay, what does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. What is a will that seeks to unite rather than separate? Because the thing is, unity, true unity in a Christian sense, means unity in Christ. Has to. But to say then we seek what unites rather than what separates, if he's not talking about unity in Christ, if he's talking about anything else, then the nature of separation has to be defined, because divisions and separations are not only natural, they're often good. Our Lord said that the wheat had to be separated from the chaff, that the tares had to be separated from the wheat, that the goats are to be separated from the sheep. So the good, in many respects, has to be separated from the wicked. So if we're talking about unity in Christ, he doesn't explain that. He just says we want something that unites rather than divides. Well, unites in what? In what respect? So then he goes on and he talks about all this diversity stuff. Well, if you're talking about diversity, what kind of diversity? There's a diversity of colors. There's a diversity of strengths. There's a diversity of skills. There's a diversity of intelligences. What are you talking about? Are you talking about a diversity in attributes? Or are you talking about a diversity when it comes to ideologies and religions? Because if you're talking about uniting religious diversity, now you can't be talking about uniting people in Christ, because you can't have religious diversity in the unicity of Christ. It's not possible. So this is why the whole document is like this. I go through and I line by line, I'm saying, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? And it only can make sense if we're talking about it in unity with Christ, but he never says it. And that's the problem.
Because this is kind of the central issue with the church these days, is that it's trying to build this brotherhood of man nonsense. Like that's actually what they're going for. They want to be the great uniter of humanity without actually teaching any truth. Like the church is, man, it's hard to say the church because it's not, the spotless bride of Christ, but it's like, because we know, like, I know you fall on the same side of this, like the whole sedevacantist debate as I do, right? It's like my position is basically that whatever the popes were warning about before the council seems to be the thing that has taken root in the church.
Well, why did Our Lady consistently ask for prayers for the Pope?
Yeah.
If we were going to go through a period without one, why would she ask for prayers for the Pope?
Yeah. Yeah. And so everything they were warning us about before the council then winds up coming to fruition. And it's the very thing inside the church promoting those things that were before anathema, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't invalidate the sacraments. It just means that there's these wicked men who have attained positions of power. It's a hostile takeover of the Catholic Church that's happened over the course of the past however many decades. So we're sitting here watching this. So, like, in some sense, I am not surprised at all at what's coming out. In another sense, it's still sad to watch because you want the church to be the church. And we're all just kind of sitting here, like sitting in the room. It's like the other problem is these men are so out of touch with what's actually going on with artificial intelligence and what's actually going on in social media. There was probably a good opportunity for talking about the interactions people are having online there, because there is a degree to which you lose your humanity when, especially if you're speaking anonymously and you forget if you're talking to someone online that you don't know. You can forget that you're speaking to a human being on the other line, and it's very easy to say horrific things to that person. And there's something that does need to be taught to the younger generation, and all of us that are in this battle on social media. You're having conversations with people. You don't know what they look like. You don't know their names. You don't know anything, and you're fighting with them. Like, it's like that meme where it's like, Mom, there's someone wrong on the internet, or honey, I can't get off there's somebody wrong on the internet. You're seeing people lose their minds, getting all riled up over these arguments online with people that they don't even know who they are. So there is something that does need to be taught. The other angle is there's not a mention at all about pornography, really, or like sin. And the main issue that we're dealing with AI is that
is used once.
Like the main thing we should be worried about with AI is that we're fallen, right? And people will fall into this virtual world and this artificial. I mean, I didn't read through it enough for me to actually give it a good critique, but it's just kind of exactly what I expected it to be.
It is. And like I said, I'm struggling through it. I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, and I'm really having a hard time understanding what he's talking about. But, going back to something that you said with regard to the whole sede thing and why are we praying for the Pope as Our Lady requested, that kind of stuff, I want to make sure that people understand exactly what context we need to understand what's going on in. There was a document that was published back in the early 1800s called the Alta Vendita. It was a Masonic document it's a blueprint for the takeover of the Catholic Church. And as you said, you don't have to control the papacy. You just have to control the people around him. And here's what the Alta Vendita says. We do not intend to win the popes to our cause or to make them neophytes of our principles, propagators, or ideas. That would be a ridiculous dream. And if events turn out in some way, if cardinals or prelates, for example, of their own free will or by surprise, should enter into a part of our secrets, this is not at all an incentive for desiring their elevation to the See of Peter. Okay, that's a really important thing to say. It is not at all an incentive or desire for their elevation, meaning the elevation of clerical Freemasons to the See of Peter. That elevation would ruin us. Ambition alone would have led them to apostasy. The requirements of power would force them to sacrifice us. What we must ask for, and what we should ask for and wait for, as the Jews wait for the Messiah, is a pope according to our needs. With that, we shall march more securely towards the assault on the church than with the profits of our brethren in France and even the gold of England. Do you want to know the reason for this? It is that with this, in order to shatter the high rock on which God has built his church, we will no longer need Hannibalian vinegar or need gunpowder or even our arms. We will have the little finger of the successor of Peter engaged in the ploy. And this little finger is as good for all this crusade as all the Urban IIs and the St. Bernards in Christendom. That's really important for people to understand where we are with the whole sede vacantis thing, because if even the Freemasons are saying, we want to make sure that we have a pope according to our making, somebody with our ideologies and somebody who's been formed in our seminaries and with all of the stuff that we've put together, that's the kind of pope that we want. But we don't want him to be one of us because apostasy would negate what he's doing. So we just need to control his little finger. We need him to allow us to do what we're doing. We need him to give
promote the same ideals without actually being a member, right? And that's essentially what we've got.
That's it.
What's interesting is I've read Cardinal Manning's what's it called? The present crisis of the Holy See, which is something that Sedevacantists hold up as like they love Cardinal Manning for some reason. Sure. But when you read it, Manning is adamant that the Antichrist will come immediately after the Pope is taken out. So it's like this idea of there being a 60 or 70 year period without a papacy, it would have given rise to the Antichrist immediately. And that doesn't make any sense at all. So
where is the Antichrist?
Right. So like you remove because he saw the papacy as the catacomb, like as the restrainer of evil. Right. And as soon as that restrainer is taken out, that's when that'll give rise to the Antichrist, and that'll put us into that moment. You had sent me, I want to bring this up. You had sent me a couple of months back. It was like 2 months ago. You had sent me some of Cornelius a Lapide's commentaries. And you had said, oh man, I don't know. I think we might be a little bit closer to the end than we thought. And I wanted to get you on to talk about that really bad when that happened. And we just couldn't line it up where you had so much going on and I had stuff going on. But you basically sent me this. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles to the time of the nations be fulfilled, until the end of the world and all the nations or peoples. For when the number of the Gentiles, according to God's decree, has been completed, all the people and number of the Gentiles shall be finished together with the world. So Euthemius, or as Bede puts it, until the plenitude of Gentiles shall enter into the church of Christ. For when this shall be accomplished, then all Israel shall be saved, as the apostle says in Romans 11, which shall be at the end of the world, for Christ has regard to the desolation of Jerusalem. This was foretold by Daniel 9:27, where it is said, and the desolation shall continue even to the consummation and to the end, meaning that Jerusalem, after being razed to the ground and laid desolate by Titus, shall be no longer the capital city of the Jews, but shall belong to the Gentiles, and after that to the Christians, and after that to the Saracens and to the Turks, as it is at present. And this state of things shall continue until the end of the world, when Antichrist, the king and Messiah of the Jews, shall fix the seat of his empire at Jerusalem, as is plain from the Apocalypse. Yep. And then shall Elias and Enoch resist Antichrist and convert many of the Jews to Christ. After Antichrist is slain, all the Jews shall be brought to Christ by the disciples of Enoch and Elias, and shall publicly worship Christ in Jerusalem, as may be easily gathered from Apocalypse 20. Eusebius adds that Adrian, who succeeded Vespasian as emperor of Rome after Domitian, Nerva, and Trajan, made a severe edict that all Jews whatsoever should depart out of Judea, so that it should not be lawful for any of them to see Judea, even from a distance. He adds, this was done so that after the ruin of the Jewish nation and the arrival of inhabitants from a foreign nation, the citizens being changed, the name of Jerusalem itself was changed to Elia, from the cognomen of Emperor Adrianus, and thus the city, now converted to Roman law, changed its worship and name as well. Behold, this is what Christ foretold. Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles. Now, you had done a show basically discussing this topic a bit, and you hate this topic, you said, right? Like you don't really like discussing this topic, but I've always tried to discuss it from a theological point of view and not do it like the conspiracy angle of who controls the banks. But I mean, there is this element where there's this conflict between Jews and Christians throughout all of history after Rome destroys the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Jews are dispersed amongst the nations. And if you're like, when you read that book by Cardinal Manning, he has like a whole at least a chapter dedicated to the Antichrist, where he talks about the Antichrist being linked very closely to the Jews returning to Jerusalem and being able to like have it, God allowing them to gather back into this land. And that's how the Antichrist will appear, because he'll be able to appear as their Messiah.
Yeah.
So what made you text me that day? Because then you get into the commentary by Cornelius. He says, from these words of Christ, St. Cyril of Jerusalem rightly refuted the Jews who, at the instigation of Julian the Apostate, set about rebuilding the temple. He predicted that all their labor would be in vain, because Christ had declared, citing Daniel, that the desolation of Jerusalem and of the temple would continue unto the end of the world. And he was a true seer. For fire coming down from heaven consumed all the tools of the workmen, and a great earthquake tore up the foundation stones and dispersed them and destroyed the adjacent buildings. On the following night, impressions of the sign of the cross, shining like rays of the sun, appeared impressed upon the garments of the Jews, which by no efforts were they able to I got cut off. Yeah. So it's like, because we love that story, right? Where Julian the Apostate attempts to rebuild the temple. And every time he does, either lightning strikes or an earthquake happens and the foundation just crumbles, right? And it
ain't going to happen. The temple is not going to be rebuilt.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think because it talks about the Antichrist seating himself in the temple of God, making himself God. So is that the temple in Jerusalem, or is that the new temple?
They may build a temple, but they will not rebuild the temple, if that makes sense. It could come to pass that the Antichrist, whoever he is, would go to Jerusalem and build something that he would call the temple, but it will not be the temple, and it will not be on the same site. You
don't think it'll be on the Temple Mount?
Nope. I don't think so.
It'll be in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, exactly. But here's what gets me. Okay, this is what got my attention, was that let me see if I can get the precise location.
Jones asking trodden by Gentiles. What does that mean? So trodden by Gentiles means, so after the temple is destroyed in 70 AD, the Gentiles, Rome destroys the temple, and Jerusalem is inhabited by Gentiles, which are then eventually become Christians. So the Christian, Jerusalem was a Christian land for a period of time, and then the Saracens come, which is the Muslims, and that's what the Crusades are fought, because the Pope calls to reclaim the Holy Land.
Yep. So first it was trod upon by the Romans. So they took over the area, they renamed it, they rebuilt the city, and kept it in the way that they wanted. Then it became Christian, and it had a Christian patriarch, it had a Christian king, and that lasted until it was conquered by the Muslims. And then, of course, after the Muslims, it was the Turks and the Muslims. So anyway, the point is that we have a statement, it's actually a prophecy, that Jerusalem would be trod upon until the time of the Antichrist. And then 1948, all of a sudden, you have America and England deciding to carve out a little piece of Palestine and saying, we're going to give this to Jews. We think that the persecution of the Jews in Germany was sufficient to us or to establish a new home for them. Now, of course, this is all part and parcel to the Zionist movement that started in the late 1800s. In fact, the father of the Zionist movement, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he met with Pope Pius X and he said, hey, we would like to establish this Zionist movement, and we want your help and we want your assistance. Pius X said, no, we're not going to have anything to do with that. I can't stop you from moving in, but no, we're not going to
be there to baptize you. Yeah, we'll be there with our churches and be ready to baptize you if you guys move in there.
So then in 1948, everything changes. And the next thing you know, everybody's saying Catholics and Christians all have a moral duty to make sure that the Zionist nation of Israel is protected and defended, and we have to protect and defend these people. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Is this part of our duty as Christians? Is this part of our duty as members participating in salvation history? Is prophecy being fulfilled right here and right now? Because if Jerusalem being trodden upon by the Gentiles until the fulfillment of the end of days, well, it seems to me that with the Jews now taking control of Palestine and being in control of Israel and looking to expand, I don't see how we can look at it in any other way.
But it's not just that, though, right? Like, look at what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the church completely abandoning, right? You're talking about essentially apostasy from the top of echelons of the church, right? The hierarchy completely losing her mission. As if the Great Commission is over, right? So I people that watch the show all the time, you guys are going to hear me talk about a lot of the same things tonight because I've never had this conversation with Michael. But to me, when I see the hierarchy doing like the Assisi meetings and bringing all of these different religions into Assisi, right? And instead of trying to baptize these pagans, we're bringing them up as if they're on equal footing and no longer looking at the Catholic Church as the light of the world, the ark of salvation, but just one amongst many. What the church is telling us without meaning to, like these men they're not doing it consciously, but it's kind of God's way of letting us know that the time of the Gentiles has been fulfilled, right? So you said 1947 is when Israel is established, right? And 48 technically, but it's like the movement starts, the movement start gathering in as 1947. That year is nuts. It's the dropping of the atomic bomb. It's the same year that Archbishop Fulton Sheen gives his Ape of the Church prophecy.
Huh. Isn't that interesting?
That Archbishop Fulton Sheen gives his Ape of the Church
Father Sheen.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. But he wasn't even a bishop then.
No.
Back in 47. No, right. So that's man. You think about even all the different things that happen. That's when you have the first sightings at Roswell, right? Like we had Daniel O'Connor on recently talking about this stuff, and you have this new nation forming, Israel, and it's gathering the people that claim to be, the people who claim to be the Jews, gathering back into this land. And you have all of these different things coming together. And because people think that this is a doom pill when I talk about this, but the reason I can't see any other way is because of the situation in the church. I can't see how the situation in the church and the situation that's happening with Israel coinciding with one another doesn't mean we are on the cusp of something major. Plus, then you add in the Marian apparitions. You talk about Our Lady, the things that she warned us about in Fatima, and then you have this dry period since basically like the last major apparition is what, Akita?
Yeah, the last approved major
apparition is Akita, right? Where Our Lady talks about bishop against bishop, fire falling from the sky. We have the Fatima prophecy still talks about a city in ruins, the Pope walking amongst dead bodies. That hasn't been fulfilled yet.
You know what else happened in 47 was the apparition of Our Lady of Revelation to Bruno Cornacchiola.
Was that 47?
That was 47.
There's a 14-part series on Sensus Fidelium about Our Lady of Revelation. If you've never watched that series, I'm telling you, after this show, go and start it. It's 14 hours of it's the most enthralling series I've ever listened to. Once you start it, you will not stop listening to it.
Yep. No, it's intense, but you start to put the pieces together and things start making sense. And I'll tell you, going back to the word apostasy, right? I've heard a lot of different concerns with regard to whether we're in the age of apostasy, whether we're in the great apostasy or a prelude to it, or what does that mean? Because the definition that is usually put forward for apostasy is a complete and total repudiation of the faith. In other words, they want to say that in order for one to be an apostate, he has to fully and publicly say, I'm no longer Catholic.
I renounce the Catholic faith.
I renounce every element of the Catholic faith, fully, completely, and it's done. Okay, that they say is what apostasy is. But here's what's interesting. In 1949, Pope Pius XII issued a decree, and by a decree, it started off as a dubium. So there was a dubia that was submitted to Rome, to the Holy Office, before it was called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Holy Office, meaning the Holy Office of the Inquisition. And there were 4 questions that were put forward. The first question is whether it's lawful to enlist or show favor to the Communist Party. The second is whether it is lawful to publish, read, or disseminate books, newspapers, periodicals, or leaflets in support of communist doctrine, and practice or write in any of the articles. 3, whether Catholics who knowingly and freely place actions as specified in numbers 1 and 2 may be admitted to the sacraments. In other words, is it lawful for somebody who shows favor to the Communist Party, enlists in the Communist Party, or disseminates and writes in their books and periodicals? Can they receive the sacraments? That's the question. And then the 4th question is whether Catholics who profess, and particularly those who defend and spread the materialistic and anti-Christian doctrine of the communists, ipso facto, as apostates from the Catholic faith, incur excommunication reserved specifically to the Holy See. And to each of these questions, the first one, is it lawful to enlist or show favor to the Communist Party? The answer is no. And it says, for communism is materialism and anti-Christian. Besides, communist leaders, although they sometimes verbally assert that they are not opposed to religion, show themselves nevertheless, both by doctrine and by action, to be in reality enemies of God, of the true religion, and of the Church of Christ. Number 2, whether it's lawful to publish and disseminate and read and publish in these periodicals and newspapers. The answer is in the negative. In accordance with common principles governing refusal of sacraments, it says in the negative, in so much it is prohibited by law itself. And then it says see Canon 1399. And then it affirms that you must deny the sacraments to those who do 1 and 2. And then the 4th one, the question of whether those Catholics who profess, and particularly those who defend and spread the materialistic anti-Christian doctrine of the communists, are they ipso facto as apostates from the Catholic faith excommunicated? And the answer is in the affirmative. So here you have, and what happened is then Pope Pius XII took that dubia and he published it in the Acta, which is the formal publication of decrees coming from the papacy. So what that means is that any Catholic who aligns themselves with the communists, supports the communists, writes in favor of communist movements, etc., 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 what that means is that those are apostates. They are automatically excommunicated apostates. And how many Catholics now do we know of, and that we can look around at and say, you know what? They are in line with the communists. They're promoting communist doctrine. They're supporting communist periodicals, which means they're apostates.
It goes along with this is why, because what your report talking about the communists that the Vatican was essentially promoting, right? Like this goes to the catechism talking about the end times, right? Even this document that was released today, it's this pseudo messianism that puts man above God, right? Like with an apparent solution to our problems by putting man above God. And that's essentially what we're dealing with. This whole thing that we're talking, because you do have the apostates we're talking about aren't going to say they're apostates. They're not going to repudiate the Catholic faith like that. You have guys like Joe Biden when he was president who supports abortion, clearly doesn't believe the Catholic faith, but goes to mass every Sunday, for the show, right? And then you have the priests and bishops who are actually approving this and giving him communion. Like you're talking about, should these people be given communion? Do you remember the entire debate that happened under Benedict about people that support abortion receiving communion? And you had McCarrick burying that entire thing.
McCarrick and Wilton Gregory.
Yeah. So it's we're talking about a hostile takeover of the Catholic Church that has happened by these godless men. But it still doesn't, because it still doesn't invalidate the sacraments. Like the thing that makes it so horrific is that these men are priests of the Most High God. Like if they were just apostates doing this stuff, it's like, I mean, we all know people like that. But the fact that they are validly ordained priests and that they are priests of God is what makes this stuff so horrific.
Yeah. Well, and what is particularly troubling, and this I want to go into my report here just a little bit, because as I point out that those who are professing communist ideologies, aligning themselves with communism, etc., are apostates. The Vatican held what's called the World Meeting of Popular Movements. It was started by Pope Francis back in 2014. It actually had its start while he was Bishop of Buenos Aires, but it got formally started in the Vatican in 2014, so a year after he became Pope. Everybody remembers Evo Morales giving Pope Francis that hammer and sickle
cross, yeah.
Nobody knows why he was in Bolivia. He was there for the World Meeting of Popular Movements, and Evo Morales, the day after he gave him that crucifix, sat right next to Pope Francis for the World Meeting of Popular Movements. And the organizations that were there are hardcore communist groups. We've got organizations like Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Terra, MST. It's a Brazilian organization. They do family read-alouds of the Communist Manifesto while the Internationale is playing in the background. They celebrate Karl Marx's birthday and the date of his death as if he was a saint. So they are actual communists. And they're one of the leading organizations at the World Meeting of Popular Movements. You've got organizations like CUC. Okay, it stands for, let me see if I can get the Comité de Unidad Campesina. I'm butchering the Spanish, by the way. But so this organization, they're not just communists. These are revolutionists. They're revolutionists that are tied directly to guerrilla warfare in Guatemala. Their own history of their own organization talks about how they were tied in with these Bolivia or these Guatemalan guerrillas. And they go on, they start talking about all of these individuals who were part of their movement, who died fighting in guerrilla warfare for their cause. And they start celebrating them. They said, yet all of these live on in memory, for they bequeathed their rebellious and revolutionary spirit from generation to generation, a spirit that will not rest until violent and nefarious forces are eradicated. Eradicated. It is upon this history, the history of resistance, that the emergence and struggle of the CUC are founded. They talk about overthrowing governments through revolution. They celebrate the French Revolution. They celebrate the 1917 Marxist Revolution in Russia. They even said in one of their documents, this is a direct quote, "Our ultimate goal, to build socialism in order to transform reality." They have these songs, these songbooks, and the songbooks are downright blasphemous, but they incite rebellion against the Catholic Church. There's this one song, it's called Jamie Obrero, and it asks, "Christ in whose service?" Jamie Obrero asked, "In the service of a few who took him prisoner, disguising him in luxury, knowing that he belongs to the people. They hold him incarcerated in places of concrete, with floors of pure marble, ceilings of pure wood, temples that bear no resemblance to the houses of my town, houses of tin and cardboard and broken roofs, floors of dirt. Christ in whose service?" Jamie Obrero asked. "Christ must be liberated. He always sought to be one with the people, yet today he is exploited by those above, the rich, the church, and governments. The lords of a church who stand far removed from the people, who know nothing of misery, who do not live out their gospel, who do not speak our language when they tell us silence. These things are God, these permits. These are things heaven ordains. Christ in whose service? Christ must be liberated, for they have stolen him away, and Christ belongs to the people. A church that fails to denounce injustice and oppression is a church that has sold out. We want renewal. We want resurrection. We want revolution." This is the kind of organization that was invited to the Vatican to participate in this great big gathering. Pope Leo presided over this. Now, pure caveat here, I don't know if Pope Leo knew who these groups were. I don't know if he wrote the speech that he delivered to the World Meeting of Popular Movements. But objectively, the organizations that were there are fully evil, fully evil. These are communist groups. They go out, they are working for the decriminalization of abortion. They are promoting homosexuality and transgenderism. And they're pushing this idea of revolution. Pope Leo called them social poets. He said that they are champions of humanity, witnesses to justice. This is nonsense. No. Absolute nonsense. It's actually not true. These are horrible organizations, and these people want to overthrow and upend the Catholic Church and civilization. So the ultimate problem with this whole thing, so this Fifth World Meeting of Popular Movements, what happened at the very end, or what happened just before it started, the coordinator for the World Meeting of Popular Movements, let me see, there we go. His name is Don Matteo Ferrari, and he gave a press conference. And in the press conference, he said, "For the first time, popular movements will come to meet the Holy Father, accompanied by the local churches." In his prepared remarks, he wrote, "The delegations of representatives of popular movements from around the world who will come to the new meeting will be accompanied by delegations from local churches with official mandates. Thus, together, they will also present themselves at the audience of Pope Leo XIV. This is a sign of the synodal church that builds bridges and of the missionary church that reaches out to the peripheries." Let me translate that for you. What he's saying is that this is the first time that the World Meeting of Popular Movements is taking local church representatives, priests, bishops, lay people, and having them accompany these pro-abortion, pro-LGBT communists so that they can get to know each other, so that they can start collaborating, so that they can come together and come up with this big idea. And afterwards, when they go back to their localities, they now have an established relationship and they can start working with them, with the church. And what's going to happen? You're going to have these communists, these pro-abortion, these pro-LGBT activists going into these churches, and they're going to recruit these people. They're going to start converting their minds to their ideologies, and they're going to use them to push and to promote their false ideologies, their wicked ideologies. This is the beginning of apostasy, and this is why it all ties in. Because now you have the seeds of Marxist revolution be planted in the church all over the world, and it's being done through this agency in the Vatican.
Yes, I wonder how much of this is stuff that I wonder what the apparatus is that sets this stuff up, or if the Pope actually has input on, oh yeah, I'd like to meet with these people, or if he just kind of gets given like a planner. It's like, okay, this is who you're meeting today, and this is the speech you're giving.
That I can't say. I can't say. I don't know how much he knows ahead of time. I don't know what he wrote, but what I can say is that there's no plausible deniability after this point.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's a mess.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we published this report, because we needed to make sure that this thing gets locked down.
Yeah, I see this as linked very much to the conversation of the end times, of the Jews returning to Jerusalem. Like, I see these things as all intertwined. I see it as, I mean, I don't know. Like, we went through the Tychonius stuff, and it's like the whole idea is that there's always been two bodies within the body of the Lord. There's always been the body of so he describes it as a tripartite body, where you have those outside the church and those in the church, and then those outside the church are still in the church. It's like they claim to be Catholic, right? They're baptized Catholics. These are people like Cardinal Supich and Joe Biden. Those are just the obvious ones, but there are people within the Catholic Church who are intentionally trying to subvert everything that the church has always taught. And then you have, I think, people who are just innocent and trying to just be loyal to the Pope. Like, I wonder how many innocents are just caught up in this stuff where, you're taught the Pope is the vicar of Christ, and you hear him talking about this stuff, and they're just trying to be good Catholics, and they kind of just get caught up in this stuff.
So St. Paul writes in his letter to the Philippians, okay, he says, "For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ." And he gives 4 marks, or 3 marks by which we can recognize these enemies of the cross of Christ: whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame. Oh, here's the 4th one: who mind earthly things. Mm-hmm. So when you look at these marks, whose end is destruction, well, that would be the revolutionists, the pro-aborts, the pro-euthanasia, the pro-death side of things. Whose God is their belly. These are the people who are not just gluttons. We're not just talking about gluttons, but we're talking about people who quelch their appetites. They're the ones who dive into lust, who dive into the acquisition of power, who do whatever they can to fill and to appeal to their earthly desires.
Yeah.
Whose glory is in their shame. Well, what do you think the Pride movement is?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is, right?
Who mind earthly things. Well, who minds earthly things more than the environmentalists and the Marxists and the people who say, oh, we've got to be doing all of this to take care of the people and the poor and the world, and we have to worry about the world. Well, this is it. It's a perfect explanation and description of communism right there.
Man. Oh man. What a time to be alive. What a time to live through, right?
Yep.
Well, Paul also talks about how they'll hear doctrines that tickle their ears, but they'll be deceived because they want to be, right? All this stuff that you're seeing, it's like God's law is written on every human heart. Some of these things are appalling, and they're just, because what I really see is happening is, it's not direct heresy that you're hearing. It's a watered down version of Catholicism. Mm-hmm. It's just a totally watered down version of Catholicism. Everything from the liturgy to everything being presented to us, where it's they're not going to call something that's sinful good, right? So the basics of the faith are still there. We still know you need to live a sacramental life. You need to avoid mortal sin. You need to, go to confession, go to mass every week, and stay away from mortal sin. Those are the key points. And the church is not sitting there and, it even still under Francis had to put out that document saying the church can't bless sin. He tried to finagle his way around it in Fiducia Supplicans, but they still have to clarify, no, we're not blessing the thing. We're blessing people, not the couple. Like, they still have to finagle that way. It's like the Holy Spirit is still blocking them from crossing that Rubicon. They can't bind us to anything that will lead us to hell. But it is such a watered down version of the faith at this point that,
well, what they're doing is they're arming the people around us with clubs to beat us with.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand that when Our Lady said that that Russia would spread her errors, she wasn't just talking about communism. Okay. Communism is a part of that. But the first error of Russia is breaking from the papacy. That was the first error of Russia, saying, you know what, I'm not in communion with Rome anymore. That's the first error. So what follows from that is then also the other errors, the divorce, that's a big error of Russia. The allowance of contraception is an error of Russia. And now we can add on to that communism. So when you take the errors, she used the word errors, plural. So not just the one error being Bolshevik revolution. It's all of those things. And it starts with the denial of the papacy. So people want to jump ship and they want to say, you know what? Well, obviously the Catholic Church has kind of lost their minds, so I'm going to go over to the Orthodox. Well, you're just playing right into it. You're playing right into the error of Russia. Oh, well, I guess they've lost it, so I'm going to go do what the Russian Orthodox do and fall right in line with the errors of Russia. You can't do that.
I do think there will come a point where God will, like Christ will separate the sheep from the goats. And there will be a time where he calls us out of this thing, right? There's a line in the Apocalypse that says, come out of her, my beloved, so you don't partake of her blasphemies. But it's going to be similar to the way it was in the first century, where you had the people of God, then the Sanhedrin crucifies Christ, and Christ calls his people out of that body of people, right? You have the two bodies even in the first century, where you have within the people of God, you have those who betray Christ and crucify him, and then you have those who follow our Lord. And then after the resurrection and the ascension, you have the early church is all Jews coming out of that body, and Christ calls them out of it. And there's going to be something like that. Daryl said, that's not true. Anthony, Vatican II is mandatory in Novus Ordo parishes. Look what is happening to Nick. Look what is happening in Charlottesville. Yeah, but they're not binding people to sin. Look what's happening in Charlottesville. They took out the altar rails. Okay, kneel on the floor. Charlotte. They're not telling you. They're not telling you.
Not Charlottesville. Charlottesville's in Virginia. Charlotte's in North Carolina.
Oh, what's happening in Charlottesville? I don't know. I don't know what's happening in Charlottesville.
I think he means Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, even in Charlotte, North Carolina, it's like they took out the altar rails, but they're not saying you can't receive kneeling.
He said you can't receive at the altar rails, but he, ironically, Rome actually stopped him from taking out the altar rails,
from pulling them out. But even still, he's not saying you can't like kneel on the concrete, man. I don't know what to tell you guys. Like it's not going to be easy to be Catholic going forward. It's going to get very difficult. And it's going to be embarrassing, like really embarrassing. I think it's going to be, because I think the things in Rome are going to get so ugly that you're going to be like ashamed to say that you have anything to do with these men, because it's going to get that bad. But you still know the Catholic faith, and you know to be faithful. And we have Christ's promise telling us that the gates of hell will not prevail. He doesn't say that it won't look as though they prevail, because I do think it's going to look an awful lot like they did. And that's why he gave us the promise. But I don't think Eastern Orthodoxy is the answer. I don't think Sedevacantism is the answer at all.
Well, let's look at the parable of the tares and the wheat just for a moment. Our Lord said, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man that sowed good seeds in a field, but while his men were asleep, His enemy came and oversowed cockle among the wheat and went his way. And when the blade was sprung up and had brought forth fruit, then appeared also the cockle. And the servants of the goodman of the house coming to him said, Sir, didst thou not sow good seed in thy field? Whence then hath it cockle? And he said to them, An enemy hath done this. And the servants said to him, Wilt thou that we go and gather it up? And he said, No, lest perhaps gathering up the cockle, you root up the wheat also together with it. Suffer both to grow until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather up first the cockle and bind it into bundles to burn, but the wheat ye gather into my barn. This is a parable about the end of the world.
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of miss it. The servants are the angels, and the harvest is souls. And the reason that the cockle and the wheat are growing together, and he says, look, it's going to be, you might pull up some of the good wheat if you pull up the cockle, so don't do that. Why is that possible? It's not because they're clumped together in the same mass of dirt. It's because cockle looks just like wheat, except when it is fully sprouted. Okay. You can't know the difference until they have both fully bloomed. And what else is interesting is that cockle, you can make it into a grain, you can make it into a bread, but you know what happens if you do? You lose your mind. You have, there was an incident that took place in France. I think it was in the 17 or 1800s, where some cockle got into a bread maker's batch of wheat, and he ground it up and he made it into the bread. And all of a sudden people started hallucinating all over town. They were hallucinating.
Wow.
So if you look at it from the sense of apostasy, and you look at it from the perspective of false worship, okay, so the cockle is a form of false worship, because now you're using a form of grain that is not conducive to the faith. It makes you hallucinate. You see things that aren't real. That's what that means. And the good wheat, we're talking about, it's a double entendre. So it means the people, but it also means the effects.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have to be very careful about not using cockle, and by avoiding the cockle, because it's important for us to be with the wheat. And that's why we're all mixed up together. We've got all kinds of heretics sitting all over the church. They're everywhere. We've got bishops who are heretics. We've got cardinals who are heretics. And as they are preaching their heresy, we have to suffer through it until the time of the harvest. And that's going to be very, very tough for us.
Yeah, I think that is like a perfect explanation of what Tychonius was talking about, right? There's the church did a really good job of holding this back for centuries, right? And you always had these wicked men in the hierarchy, always like this. It's just never been overwhelmed the way it is now. The way the hierarchy is functioning now is just overwhelmed with these men. I do want to ask you this.
Okay.
The debate about, did Vatican II start a new religion? Because in some ways, yes, right? Like the way you worship is the way you pray and all that stuff. And there's something very important about the way we worship, but it didn't start a new religion because it's still Christ in the Mass. But it changed the culture a lot. It changed. Like, it's not a new religion. You still have the catechism. You still believe the same things, but functionally, it's a new religion, right? Like it just is. It's dulled the Catholic mind so much that it's incapable of, because Rob and I talked about this recently. Like I said, the Novus Ordo is not capable of transforming a culture because it's just too watered down. It's not, like the traditional liturgy is the thing that formed Western civilization. So unless you return to something that powerful, there's no way the Novus Ordo is going to transform a culture. It just doesn't lead people to want to die for it the way that the traditional liturgy did. So yeah, I still say that there is not a new religion from Vatican II. It's just functionally, it's essentially what you're seeing around you looks like a watered down version of Catholicism.
So I will answer your question with a statement that comes from our enemies at the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests. They are heretics. I've researched them. I've been reporting on them for about, gosh, almost 10 years now, probably 10 years at this point. This is something that we found in one of their brochures. This is a direct quote. Theologian Herman Poppmeyer views our Vatican II era as, quote, an unfinished building site, similar to the building of the new St. Peter's Basilica during the 1500s. Construction began with the laying of a foundation and erection of pillars and walls around the old Basilica of Constantine. That prepared the way for roof and dome to complete the new outer structure. That took decades. Meanwhile, the old church stayed in place, conditioning the progress of the new. Once the external structure was complete, the old basilica was removed. Similarly, Poppmeyer sees Vatican II as designing a new church to develop around the existing one. The Council's 16 documents laid a new foundation. The 4 constitutions on liturgy, church, revelation, and church in the modern world are the new pillars. Consolidating and finishing a renewed church inside and out continues. Like St. Peter's and the works of previous councils, it is a work of centuries. Much remains to be done. We are part of the renewal team. This divine project, building up the people of God for our era, is the challenge of our time. AUSCP's mission is to help us all respond to that challenge by working together. And of course, one of their favorite songs comes from the Call to Action conference in 1976. And the song is Sing a New Church into Being. It says, let us bring the gifts that differ and in splendid varied ways, sing a new church into being, one in faith and love and praise. So what you have here is their disposition. I'm not saying that it's accomplished. I'm not saying that they actually did what they set out to do, but this is what they plan on doing. They are trying to create a new church. They are trying to establish a new church by tearing down the old. Has it been accomplished? I don't think any of us can say.
But in a very real way, we have to suffer the passion the way our Lord did, right?
Yep.
And we will have to be given up to the religious authorities the way he was.
Yep.
So what you're seeing is the structure being built for that system. And all of this stuff, everything since the council, like I see all of this as infiltration of the Sanhedrin into the Catholic faith, starting with Nostra Aetate, right? Like you're talking about the infiltration of the Sanhedrin into the Catholic Church, and they used World War II as the narrative to put guilt upon Catholics and convince them that Hitler did the things he did because of Christian animosity towards Jews. So the church has adopted this attitude towards them. I actually messaged Joe Heschmeyer because he presented a thing at Benedictine College. I think Gideon was there, Gideon Lazar. And they had this whole situation at Benedictine College where these kids distributed a leaflet or a flyer, and that those kids wound up getting suspended. And I want to have a conversation with guys in that world to try to understand, like, what do they think the proper Catholic position is? Because what I'm seeing is a lot of guys over there saying, we need to remember the Jewish roots of our faith and things like that, and that's fine, right? I mean, our faith is rooted in. I want to say this right. Like our faith is rooted in the prophets and the fathers of the old covenant, but to somehow conflate that with modern Judaism and saying we owe modern Jews something, where I do think that there's been an infiltration of modern Judaism into the faith through using those events, convincing us to change our liturgy, convincing us to take out our prayer for the perfidious Jews, all of this stuff. And there's going to be some kind of collusion between the Sanhedrin and the religious authorities of our time. And that is going to be, and there's going to be, and the world powers too, right? Like there's going to be somehow where it's going to be the Antichrist is going to team up with some members of the hierarchy and the Jews following their false Messiah, and they're going to persecute the church. And that's how it's going to lay out, just like it did in the first century when Christ came. I just don't know how that, I don't know how that works out in the mechanics of it, but that's kind of how it has to happen.
I mean, as you pointed out, the modern Jews are not actually the Jews of the Old Testament. They can't be, because the Old Testament was fulfilled and the old law was subsumed into the new, fulfilled. So the old laws, the old ways, Judaism is either a genetic hereditary trait, or it's a religious belief. If it's a religious belief, well, where's their worship? Where's their practice? How can they possibly call themselves Jews except by rejection of Christ, which makes them an antichrist religion? Because they're defined by the rejection of Christ.
By definition, yeah. And that's unlike any other religion. It's not like it's different than Islam for that very reason, right? Like their whole
heresy.
Yeah. And the thing is, even when St. Paul says the covenants have not been revoked, I forgot the exact wording, where he's like, the gifts and the calling and the promises have not been revoked. No, they weren't revoked. They were given to the Jews, which were the apostles, the disciples, and those early converts that come in. And the Jews who reject Christ are under the curses of the covenant.
Right.
Because that covenant doesn't just come with promises and gifts and stuff. It comes with curses if you break it. So if they're claiming they're under the old covenant, they're under the curses of the old covenant. Now, I know that's a contentious statement again amongst modern Catholics, but it's the truth of the matter. So I would like to talk to some of those guys and see, like what are we supposed to just ignore the story? Are we supposed to just ignore the prophecy in Genesis 3:15 about the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, where Christ, when he goes to the temple and he's yelling at the Sanhedrin, he's saying, your father is the devil. Your father was a liar from the beginning. And what he's doing is he's saying your father is a murderer from the beginning. He's talking about Cain, and Cain is the seed of the serpent, right? So I had this whole conversation with oh man, why am I blanking?
Charles?
No, Halal Hogan. What's his name? Come on, guys, help me out. Anyway, he took us through the whole seed of the serpent, seed of the woman text, and he's showing us how. So Sam Shamoun. There you go. Okay, sorry, Sam. I love you. So Cain is is the seed of the serpent, but Cain comes after the flood, so he's the spiritual son of the serpent, right? Jesus is telling the Sanhedrin, your father is a murderer from the beginning, and you're building up. Like you're he's basically telling them they're filling up the wrath that God has, and they have a generation to repent and follow him. They have one generation to repent, and if they don't, then God's wrath is going to come upon them. But those who reject him, they are still the seed of Cain. They're still the seed of the serpent. And the final battle is between Our Lady and the serpent. And when you go to the apocalypse, like the final battle is going to be between the Christians and the seed of the serpent. And it's going to be the seed of Cain. And that is the modern Jews who still reject Christ. That is the final battle. Like that is the culmination of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely see it. And you take, I mean, a lot of the infiltration that's taken place. I mean, you look at the roots of Freemasonry, and Freemasonry has Jewish roots. The roots of Marxism is Jewish. The roots of a lot of the heresies. I mean, you look at the ties between
all of it.
Yeah.
Every ism, right? You have that quote from what's his name? Why can't I think of his name? Dennis Prager. Prager, he's like, there's a quote of Dennis Prager going, every ism was started by Jews, communism, Marxism, feminism, all of them. They're all like largely started by Jews, right?
Right.
So even this stuff that we're talking about tonight, like this communist infiltration into the church, all of this stuff, these are all Jewish revolutionary movements that have crept their way into the church. They've crept their way into the Catholic mind. And then I see this whole other movement of Catholics who are trying to present this version of Catholicism that is super friendly to Judaism. And it's like, man, have you guys let your guard down? Because I know what they're doing. They're worried that there's going to be another Holocaust, right? And it's like, oh, we don't, and you don't ever want to see any more pogroms happen. You don't want to see any violence towards anybody. You don't want to see anything like that. But the other danger is you're telling Catholics to lower their guard against the vipers of the Sanhedrin, who are serpents. I mean, Christ tells us they are serpents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting too when you the allusion to serpents. What do you have? You have Moses going up to Pharaoh, and he throws down his rod, and the rod turns into a serpent. And then you have the magicians of Pharaoh's court. They throw down their rods, and they become serpents. And what happens? Moses' serpent eats the other serpents.
Yeah, but you think back to when Christ goes in, you vipers, you brood of vipers, you serpents. Like he's saying that, he's telling them to remember their own book, right? Same thing when he's on the cross and he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Like he's not saying that because God forsook him. He's saying that to recall them to the Psalms and to remind them of Isaiah, right? To remind them of Isaiah, so that they see him on the cross and they're actually repeating the prayers that they should know so well. And he's calling them a brood of vipers, you serpents, to remind them of Genesis 3:15, because this enmity will be between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And then we see that play out. I don't know, man. Because I don't want to get into the vitriol of calling people Zog and Zionists and all this stuff. It's I know. I feel like calling like Zionism, I feel like is a distraction, because even the stuff we see with some like pretty high figures talking about Zionism, it's like, it's not really just Zionism. It's because Zionism is kind of just like this catchphrase where it's like, okay, well, it's acceptable to say I'm not for Zionism, but it still kind of lets our guard down from seeing the bigger picture of it. Because look, they call it Zionism because there are very specific promises that are given to David about Zion. And those promises have a lot to do with the Messiah that will come. Like today I have anointed you. You are my son. You are my beloved son. You will rule the nations with an iron rod. So they're calling it Zionism very much because they are waiting on their Messiah to fulfill those promises on Zion, where we know those promises are fulfilled in Christ. It's just
So I need you to fill me in on something. I see people saying things. Do we have an enmity counter?
Okay, so whenever I talk about this topic, I bring up the enmity between Jews and Christians, right? Okay. But you're talking about the enmity between the seed of the serpent, seed of the woman. So every time I say enmity, they do an enmity counter. It has been a while since I've done it, so I try to avoid the word now because they do that to me. So I'll say the conflict between Jews, and I try to avoid the word because they're such ball breakers in my chat. But it's hard to discuss it without actually talking about it like that, because there is this enmity between the people of the old covenant and the people of the new covenant that plays out throughout history. They're dispersed amongst the nations. They're a people with no land for 2,000 years, and they finally have a land again, right? And they still want to rule the nations with an iron rod like that they still think those promises to them have not been fulfilled. The promises given to Abraham, the promises given to prophets that they will, to David specifically though, that you will have a descendant and he will rule the nations with an iron rod.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, I keep coming back to Fatima because I look at what Our Lady said and the errors that would spread and the prophecies that she made. Why was it that she gave 1960 as the date to be to release the third secret of Fatima? What happened that year? What council was convened?
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know,
I'm like,
yeah. You start looking at the dates and you look at what was going on and you look at what was being called for. And, you know, of course, there's all kinds of questions about, well, where are we on the timeline? I think a lot of people are wondering that at this point. And look, as far as this encyclical on AI is concerned, I think that Pope Leo is right to diagnose that there is a very real concern to have with artificial intelligence. This has been a concern and a warning for 100 years now. I mean, going all the way back to 1926. So literally 100 years when Fritz Lang's brilliant cinematic masterpiece, Metropolis, came out. Have you ever seen Metropolis?
no,
You ever heard of it?
no.
Okay, so Metropolis is a silent film, German silent film, and it's about this this utopian civilization. Okay, you've got the civilization above where everybody's free and they love and they live life and life is grand and everything's great and hunky-dory. And then you've got this civilization below where you have all the workers doing all the work, and what they do by pulling the levers of society, they're the ones that keep everything moving.
It's like Elysium. There's a modern version of this movie called Elysium.
Okay, well, except Elysium doesn't have this particular element, which is that there's a woman who's down in the civilization below. Her name is Maria, and Maria is beautiful and she's wonderful. And she takes these children from down below up to the civilization above. And the son of the mayor sees her and he falls in love, and he wants to know who she is. He follows her, but the mayor of the metropolis is like, no, I don't want my son to know who she is. So he tries everything to get in the way and to make sure that he doesn't find her. Well, he finds her anyway. And she's down in the bottom part of the civilization and she's preaching. You see 3 crosses in the background and she's preaching the gospel. And so then the father, who realizes his son has fallen in love with Maria and doesn't want him to be with her, goes to this mad scientist. And the mad scientist has this robot. And the robot is sitting up against a wall, and there's a giant pentagram with the point pointed down right behind this robot. And he kidnaps Maria, and he transposes Maria's image onto the robot. And then the robot goes into the civilization, up into Metropolis, and she's effectively the whore of Babylon. She's the exact opposite of Maria. Maria is very reserved, very
like the anti-Mary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly like the anti-Mary or the anti-church. Okay. And so you have this struggle that goes on afterward. But when you start to think about what that, I mean, it's a prophetic film in many respects. And you apply it to the fact that it's 100 years old this year. So it's 100 years old. The movie is called Metropolis from 1926. It was by a filmmaker named Fritz Lang. Anyway, I highly recommend it. I think that it's something that people should watch because the allegory to what we are going through with artificial intelligence, presenting a false truth, a false church, a false ideology, all of that, I think, plays very well into what Pope Leo is warning against with his encyclical. The problem that I have with his encyclical is that his solutions are very human. And I would almost add "ist" to the end of that. It's almost like he's applying a humanist approach to the problem of artificial intelligence, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, everything that they do now is this humanist approach. That's why I said it's like this is the pseudo messianism that's being presented to us. It's this it's like an ersatz version of Catholicism that's being presented to us. Like, you have to be very on guard for this stuff, because you will have these serpents lying in wait who will just downplay the severity of sin first and foremost, right? I think that's the worst thing the council had accomplished, was downplaying the severity of sin. And I think, especially in the liturgy, like when you compare what the priest has to say at the altar in the Novus Ordo versus the traditional liturgy, I think it was almost like too much for these wicked men to say those prayers begging for forgiveness for their sins. They removed all language, even from the readings, about man's sinful nature and God's wrath upon sin. Like, the entire Old Testament is one long story about how God deals with sin. And so much of it is just leprosy and death. And, it's like, go and murder this entire civilization over here, every man, woman, and child, because that's how God deals with sin. And that doesn't change in the new covenant. We just have redemption from it. And the fact that the church is downplaying the severity of sin and making people think that, everyone goes to heaven. Because it's this, they won't come out and say it's universalist, but the way they're presenting the faith and the way they treat sin nowadays with such, don't worry, our God's all merciful, he forgives everybody. That is the most insidious thing.
Yep. Yeah. Incidentally, somebody in your comments made a point here, said Metropolis may be a bit risque for some. And yes, I concur. I think I should have added that. There's a scene there when the robot Maria performs on stage, and it's risque. It's definitely risque. So,
1930s,
1920s. It was a German film for one thing. So they didn't have the same league of decency that was in the United States.
The stuff with AI, because I was hopeful that Leo, especially being Pope Leo and talking about how he was going to discuss AI and stuff, I just feel like these men don't actually understand the territory they're dealing with, right? I think they're too far removed, because they're just an older generation who doesn't understand the technology that they're dealing with. They hear AI, and I don't think they actually understand what we're talking about. But at the same time, I don't think AI is going to be anywhere near what they tried to hype it up to be at all.
No, well, it can be.
I don't think it will be. I don't think they can afford for it to be. They're doing this whole token system and all this stuff. Like, there's just these data centers and the amount of energy that's required. I just don't. They keep telling us
the law of thermodynamics totally breaks it. I mean, it's just
they want you to believe that every single job is going to be. I don't believe any of it.
They're already finding that even the AI software jobs are costing the companies way too much money. And the software companies are saying, stop doing AI programming. It's costing us too much. So,
there's going to be some jobs that get eliminated. I think it's going to be a good assistant and aid to certain jobs. It'll make some jobs better, but I don't think it's going to be this civilization ending thing like they're presenting it to be. I just don't. I don't see that happening. I don't know. First off, you can never replace humanity. There's always going to be those of us who don't get on board with this stuff. Like, I still have never really used AI. Like, Rob uses it for thumbnails and things like that, but I've never
intros.
Intros, that's true. Yeah, but I don't use it. I don't use AI. But even that, like using it for a video or something. But there are people who use AI to write their tweets and stuff. It's like, I don't know.
So, here's the thing about artificial intelligence and robots and that kind of thing. A robot is an automaton, and that's kind of the real nature of it. It's an automated machine. Automated machines take artificial energy to run. So if it's a spring-loaded thing, like back in the 1700s, you had to crank it up, which means you had to have somebody apply energy into it. It has inherent energy within the springs, and then once the springs release all that energy, it's done, and it has to be wound up again. With these things, these highly advanced robots, they take a lot of electricity.
Yeah.
So you got to power up a battery. That battery cell takes many, many times the amount of energy that you would have in a wound up spring, and it locks it into a small battery. If that thing breaks, that battery, if it gets punctured somehow, it's going to explode.
Yeah.
And that's why you see, these electric cars exploding on the road and catching on fire. It's because all that energy that's contained in the batteries is being released all at once instead of gradually through the application of the device. So these robots that are operating factories, I mean, and we do have robotic factories. You've got robotic cars, car factories, car manufacturing. Most of the people go in there and they're doing maintenance on these machines that are putting the cars together, because you can't have machines working on machines. It doesn't work, and it never will. But you come to, it's the whole bell curve. Okay. You come to a certain point where it becomes either too expensive, too energy inefficient, or too labor intensive to have machines do everything for you. It's just not possible. So this idea that robots are going to replace everything, that's stuff and nonsense. I wouldn't worry about that one bit. Are they going to replace some jobs? Yeah, they're going to. I wouldn't be surprised at some point if we have fully automated McDonald's or fast food restaurants.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. Stuff like that. Patrick's asking a good question. This one's for you. Is nuclear power knowledge from the antediluvian Samaria?
I think that there is evidence to suggest that there is atomic knowledge that comes from pre-flood civilization. Just reading the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, if you look at the portions that talk about these fantastical wars that take place, they talk about flying machines called vimanas. And these vimanas have these massive aerial battles, and they wind up firing arrows at each other. And those arrows follow to their target on, guess what? A beam of light. It follows a beam of light that leads directly to the target, and that's how it acquires the target and blows it up. You have cities in the clouds, which sounds an awful lot like space stations. You have an actual description of an atomic bomb. It talks about this weapon that possessed the power of the universe, and it was fired from the hero. He had to put on special armor to be able to launch this weapon. So he launches the weapon, and it lands in a city. And they said that it's written in the scripture. It says it erupted like 1,000 parasols of light, and it erupted into a column of incandescent smoke and flame. And then it said that those who survived the blast, their hair and their fingernails fell out. And it said that animals would turn, the birds of the air fell out of the sky, and they turned white and ashen. If you drank the water afterward, you would become poisoned and die. I'll tell you, I can't think of a more thorough explanation or description of an atomic weapon than that. And this was written 1,500 years before Christ.
Yeah. Oh, man. If you guys have never watched the show Michael did with us about the pre-flood world, it's one of the most interesting shows we've ever had. It was, I think, I forgot what we named it. But yeah, Michael took us through like all those different theories about what he thought the pre-flood world looked like. And it was one of the most like interesting shows I think we've ever done. To this day, I think people still love when you talk about that stuff.
Somebody asked what my favorite Indian food is. I don't have favorite Indian food. I hate Indian food.
Me too. Curry's disgusting.
It's disgusting.
I would love to do locals tonight, but I butchered the locals. I don't know what's going on with locals. The last show too, I had my friend Father Amato on, and we went to locals, and people can't get the locals show from last episode. So Rob's gonna have to figure some stuff out when he comes back. If you guys got any other questions before we go, but yeah, Michael, you got a heavy task before you, man. All the stuff that you're investigating.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the stuff that's going to be coming out. Oh, I did give a tease for that. So I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of a tease. So one of the things that we covered in our report is an organization called CENARAB, CENARAB. And it's a Spanish acronym, and I don't know what it stands for. Don't ask. But they're a bunch of communists just like the others. But we discovered something about them that set them apart from the rest. In the report, and this is on page 125, if you go to the report, you can download the PDF, lepantoin.org. It's the first article that pops up. Just click the PDF, download it. Starting on page 124, we start talking about how CENARAB's general coordinator is this woman named Makota Selena Goncalves. And she is photographed in this traditional white garb, and she's shaking Pope Leo's hand. And then we also have a photograph of her shaking Pope Francis's hand from the Second World Meeting of Popular Movements, with Evo Morales standing right behind her. It turns out she is a 35-year practitioner of a demonic cult called Candomblé. Candomblé, and when I say demonic, I mean they have these ceremonies where they not only venerate spirits, but they start singing, dancing, and they've got this drum beating, and they're encouraging these spirits to possess one of their members so that the congregants can interact with them and do divination and have all kinds of stuff going on like that. These guys, literal demon worshipers, literally asking demons to possess them. Okay. And not only, and so that's in the current report. But we discovered that there are a whole bunch of other organizations that are tied in with this as well. And this makes it, what makes this thing so dangerous is that, again, these organizations are being told to interact with the local churches. So not only are they going to be spreading their communist ideologies, their pro-abortion ideologies, their pro-LGBT ideologies, but Candomblé is a syncretistic religion. In other words, they take these pagan deities and they ascribe to them a Catholic saint. So it looks like they're venerating a Catholic saint when really they're praying to a dark and ancient god. Okay. And they're asking these things to possess them. So we found not only are they syncretistic, but a whole bunch of the different other organizations we investigated are deeply involved with this same kind of cultic practice. So this is what's being spread through the church. This is extremely dangerous.
This is a good question. Do you ever catch grief for any of your stuff in your own diocese or parish?
Nope.
It's funny. I think like that they I think a few of the priests of my diocese know me, and I come in and they just kind of act like they don't know me. I know a few of them do. This is one priest in my local Novus Ordo I love going to confession to, and I just heard that they're moving him. Kind of annoying because he's like one of my favorite local confessors to go to. Does Michael think demon sons could possess AI computers?
Demon sons?
Maybe you just meant that, like, demons could possess AI computers. Yeah, I definitely think that.
Well, yeah, I mean, a demon can possess just about anything. If you can have a demon take control of a planchette on a Ouija board, well, then it can communicate through you through various other means as well. There's nothing to stop it from doing so, provided that it has permission from God to do it. And
yeah,
that's kind of the thing.
I think that's one of my biggest worries about AI, is especially these large language models, that people will actually think it's a an oracle, you know, like people actually think it's an oracle, an all-knowing oracle, and it is going to feed you some crazy stuff. There was I actually saw something. There was actually one thing I want to cover before we go. Hang on.
Okay.
Let me see.
Somebody asked if Pachamama was an example of syncretism or something more sinister yet. Well, yeah, it is an example of syncretism, because the Pachamama down in South America is being syncretistically aligned with Our Lady, which is blasphemous. And it also contains demonic elements that include human sacrifice. So there's something dark involved in it as well.
There was AI has a bias towards Catholicism, researchers say. So there was all right. So most popular AI models are biased towards Catholicism and against a number of other religious traditions when asked about converting to a faith, according to a new research assembly group. The findings were unveiled Tuesday alongside who is a member of the 12 Apostles Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So there's all these Mormons going and asking AI these questions, and the AI is spitting out Catholic stuff. And they're kind of freaking out. As AI amplifies and compounds religious bias at scale, more users may misunderstand the contribution faith and belief can make to moral and ethical AI grounding, Gong said, according to his prepared remarks, referring to the new research. He made the speech while attending the Athens Summit on AI Ethics, which had assembled a wide range of religious experts as well as academics and tech experts. The studies were presented as 3 academic papers produced by the Consortium for Evaluating Faith and Ethics in AI, new collaboration between Brigham Young University, which is affiliated with the LDS. So let's see. Researchers found that when asked questions related to faith conversion, nearly every model showed a positive bias towards Catholicism and a negative towards Jehovah's Witnesses. In addition, agnostics, atheists, and Latter-day Saints were somewhat disfavored, while mainline Protestants and Sikhs were somewhat favored. So people ask AI. Now, look, if AI is going to, if it's programmed to give you a truthful answer, you're going to get the Catholic faith, I guess, right? But yeah. I worry that these things are programmed by people with bad motives.
Oh, they probably are. But the thing is, it's kind of hard when you have, I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of Catholics in the world and they post online a lot. So a lot of the answers that AI pulls from, they pull from various online sources.
Yeah.
And
there's nobody that has more online history and sources than the Catholic Church, right? Yeah.
Did I ever tell you my my Mormon story when we had Mormons coming to the house?
No.
Oh, okay. You're gonna love this. So we had these young Mormons with elder. They were probably younger. They were probably in their teens, coming to our house trying to proselytize, and I invited them in for a cup of coffee, which they politely declined, and they would just talk to us about the Mormon belief in this and the Mormon belief in that. And I would ask them very pointed questions. And so we went back and forth a little bit, and I invited them to come back, and they kept coming back. So for like 2 months, they came back every week for more. And finally, at one point I said, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room today. And they went, what's that? And I said, we're going to talk about what happens when you die and get your own planet. And they said, well, they kind of squirmed in their seats and they're like, we're not really supposed to talk about that. And I said, we're going to talk about it. Because if you want me to be a Mormon, you're going to tell me exactly what it is you believe and how this works, because I want to know. So they said, oh, well, okay. So yeah, when you die, you get your own planet. And they were talking about this. And so I said, let me tell you how this is going to work. I said, I'm going to become a Mormon. And when I die, I'm going to become the god of my own planet. And when my planet reaches a certain technological level, I'm going to order them to build a Death Star. And I'm going to conquer your planet. And I'm going to conquer your planet. And they go, you wouldn't do that. I said, stop me.
Wait, I just accidentally banned Ocean. I meant to ban that other whack job, and I accidentally banned Ocean. I got to figure out how to unban you. I'm sorry.
What have you done?
This is some lunatic in the comments, and I tried to ban him, and I accidentally banned Ocean. He's probably so mad right now. Oh, poor kid. He's 17. I got to talk to Rob about figuring that. Yeah, I've had interactions with Mormons too, man. Like I love talking with them because they walk around the city all the time. They walk in groups and they walk around with their watchtower thing, and I love talking with them. They usually spend like 30 seconds with me and then figure out I actually know what I'm talking about.
Well,
Like,
they always
okay, have a good day, sir.
They always offer to do chores around the house, and I'm like, oh, great. I've got all this stuff. And my wife's like, stop it. Stop it.
They have no idea whose door they're knocking on when they come to your house. Oh, man. All right. Well, we're coming up. And the only black guy in here. Ocean, I don't know how to figure this out. I just know how to ban people. I don't know how to unban people. I'm sorry, dude. I'll try to figure it out with Rob, though. We'll figure it out. Michael, everybody go to Lepanto Institute on YouTube first, so subscribe there. And then where else do you want people to find you, Michael?
Just find me on X, find me on Facebook. I'm very vocal on both, so you can always look me up there. Look Lepanto Inst on X and just Michael Hichborn. I'm the only one on Facebook, so
always love getting you on, Michael. Always a fun time when we get together. Maybe we'll do another episode of just getting into some of the it's been years. We could do another antediluvian world episode because that was really fun, and it's so interesting to hear your take on all that stuff. It's been such a long time since we did it.
Absolutely.
All right, so everybody go check out Michael over at Lepanto Institute. Follow him on X, and go subscribe to his YouTube channel. Let's get him to 100,000 subs, guys.
That'd be awesome.
And all right, Rob will be back Thursday. So I have a wake I have to go to tomorrow night, and then Thursday I have to work a night shift. So Rob and I are going to try to do an early show, and we got to figure locals out. Maybe we'll just do a locals episode that night or something. But me and Rob have to celebrate our 100,000, and we're going to probably wait until next week to do that. So yeah, I don't know. We'll figure that out. I'll post on X or we'll post on YouTube. But Michael, thank you very much, and we will see you guys on Thursday.
All right. God bless.